Welcome, everybody, to Distilled Security Podcast, Episode 6. My name's Justin Leapline. I'm here with Rick and Joe, and welcome. This is halfway through the year here. We got Episode 6 in the books.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Yeah, fantastic.
Look at this.
Flown by.
So we got a number of exciting topics here. Just coming off Tris, we have a welcome video that we did a whole bunch of interviews there that'll be coming out either with this podcast or alongside it. We're still deciding that and everything. But while we wait for that, we wanted to dive into a number of interesting topics. First one here, the SEC this week here has announced that they're finding a whole bunch of different organizations for not lack of disclosure, but not disclosing enough.
Insufficient
disclosure and everything. So I want to get your guys' thoughts onto this. I think it's really interesting as we're kind of figuring out what the SEC disclosure really means, and it was all related to the SolarWinds incident.
Yeah.
And the 4 companies that are in question here, they all got fined different things, and they did disclose, but they were kind of the CYA, type of thing. Something happened, that we don't want to really tell you about. We think it is or is not material, and that's about all they did. And the SEC basically came out and said, hey, you didn't give enough information.
Right. These aren't small issues either.
No.
The 4 companies, just for the record here, Unisys, their civil penalty was $4 million.
Yeah.
And Avaya at $1 million, Checkpoint at $995,000, and Mimecast at $990,000.
Yeah, they're big. I mean, it's a lot of money.
So, out of this, what do you think companies are going to take, from this? Obviously they're going to scrutinize if they do have a disclosure, the right amount, but how do you know what the right amount is, at this point here?
And I'm even worried about how long is it going to take. These were filed in 2021 and 2022, and so this is like years later.
Yeah. I wonder if we'll see. It would be interesting to see if we see some companies doing amendments potentially, because they might realize we had this thing going on. We should actually proactively say something now or say something in our next K or Q.
I'm obviously not a lawyer, but even do an amendment, like how late until it doesn't matter anymore? Because it has to be shareholder relevant.
It does, but I think if you demonstrate, we were confused or we weren't fully aware. You'll probably still. it might reduce your penalty, I would say.
Well, with this, you could. Well, maybe companies are in a position now to say, well, we looked at what the decision was that came out this week, which now prompted us to go back and reevaluate.
Right. Precedent
so
changed.
that would maybe be a reason that we might see those updates. I'd be very interested to see if we do see those updates.
Yeah. But in terms of how much is enough, I think it's probably still a question. Now, when you look at these specific ones, and it actually took me a while to find an article that had the fact pattern, what existed in terms of the breach, and then what the actual disclosure was. Most of the articles I was seeing, I probably did 20, 25 minutes of research on this, were just parroting the SEC disclosure on it. So I did want to shout out to Cyberscoop, which is a website that I had not really...
We'll put a link in the
looked at before, but they were the only one that I found in my journeys that actually did what I would think of as novel reporting in terms of, hey, we looked at the disclosures, they were this. Hey, we looked back at what the breaches were, they were that.
Which every security person reading that article is I wonder what they said.
Right, exactly. That's why I was I want to understand, but all I could find was the SEC quotes, which is straight in the press brief. So Cyberscoop, and then the reporter themselves, Derek Johnson. So good for you, Derek. Thank you for doing good reporting. But I was actually the first thing was I was kind of surprised at how many articles were just rehashes of the SEC press brief, dead internet theory is a thing and blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
But I did walk away still with 2 questions that I thought were interesting. One is I wonder how those fines were calculated, right? And if you are a company thinking about whether or not to revise your disclosures, maybe that's probably pretty relevant information, right? And then 2, I wonder how knowledgeable the external audit firms that worked with these companies were about the reality on the ground of the brief and how much they may have advised or didn't advise the company on what those disclosures should be. Because I saw civil penalties for the company, right?
Right.
But external auditors, their whole job is to sort of, make sure that what you're putting in the financials is complete and accurate.
Well, and I think it comes down to a question, is anybody really knowledgeable about exactly how much I have into this? I think, the SEC has given a whole bunch of information out, but
Right.
They're still pretty vague onto it. It's like, hey, you need to disclose if it's material, which means it affects any, like, a common shareholder would want the information to be known. But they don't give examples. They don't get into, like, here are the details you need to disclose.
Well, to be clear,
Yeah.
this, and I don't know if everybody who's watching is tracking this, but this will all happen before the SEC rules in place, right?
The final enforcement, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So
Right.
there wasn't a standard to follow quite like there is now.
Yeah, so that's interesting too, like the timing condition, associated with that. I will say in this case, some of that reporting that I saw suggested that the breaches were clearly material in nature, right? It was like state-sponsored adversaries and multiple servers, access to customer files, literally monitoring, in one case, like the incident response team's emails, right? But the disclosure that mirrored that, like the disclosure that, reported for that period of time effectively said, oh, well, a limited number of emails were impacted, and there's like something along the lines of there's no current evidence of an active cybersecurity breach, right? So a little bit different than like, customer email or customer information was compromised, and our emails were monitored for a while.
Yeah.
So
I'd love to see what makes Unisys they're misleading 4 times as misleading,
right,
as Avaya from the 4 million to the 1 million.
Yeah, I know two of the 4 as well were very much, the situation was effectively they had a breach and it was clearly a material breach, but what they did in their disclosures was they just kind of repeated the general cybersecurity risks, maybe with 1 or 2 very tiny tweaks, to say, oh yeah, cybersecurity, instead of like could have an impact, like, has had a minor impact or something like that.
Right.
And so almost, or I should say very much, it seems like minimizing the nature of the disclosure, almost advertising it like it's a lot of the same old stuff, as opposed to, a new thing happened and it was big or big-ish. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
And I'm curious, you go into like talking about like the, the fine structure. If they lost money, started reported into their like 8K, 10K that they lost money because of this incident, that would almost have a direct impact on shareholder value into that. Like if they said we lost $5 million because of this hack, shareholders would want to know that because that affects bottom line, affects their investment interest, all that stuff. So that might have, depending on how they disclose how much money was involved with the hack, could be an impact into how much they got fined.
Right, if they dig into the books and say, what was the actual internal
if you said it cost $5 million, but you said it was nothing, type of thing, like, and you're over that percentage of the company.
Those were business as usual improvements.
Yeah, exactly.
Kicking adversaries out of our systems.
We're planning to do this anyway.
and
you're planning on patching eventually anyway.
This reminds me of something we talked about a couple months ago, where MGM, they were attacked. They had their incident. And if I recall, I don't have any of these facts in front of me, didn't their leader say, compared to the size of us, all this was still not material?
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I'm wondering, if we look into the future, is somebody going to challenge that?
Yeah, it's interesting. And there's, I should be more informed on this, so I won't say too much. But like, I do think that the SEC is carving out cybersecurity risks in a way that it's material because it could have major impacts. Like
no. So the way they have the disclosure is they actually advise, because a lot of people are reporting, I forget what the section is.
Yeah.
If it is material, you report in this section. If you're not sure, it goes into another section.
But that's what I'm saying. So like, even if you're not sure, you still have to include it, right?
If you're unsure, there's basically, I've seen a lot of them that basically say, we're still evaluating whether it's not material today.
Right.
It could become material. Then we'll do a notice, when it does that. And that's actually the SEC requirement.
Right.
Is once you consider it material, you have to file it into this other section.
Right. Yeah.
Type of thing.
Yeah. But it's interesting because, there could be in theory, a bunch of things that happen, right? That could become material, but then they don't because you realize the extent isn't as big as it could be or whatever. And so I think their thing is, you need to make people aware that something bad the other shoe might be about to drop for people that might be about to invest, I suppose.
Yeah. I don't know. The whole thing's interesting. I don't envy the lawyers that are trying to sort this out, giving advice to the organizations when they're going through a stressful time of breach, being like, okay, how much information do we put? Like,
right.
We don't want to give everything, with this, but we also don't,
Well, yeah, I mean, it's making sure you're saying all the things that are required, but you don't necessarily want to say any of the things that aren't required. And the guidance is kind of general.
So what do you think CISOs who are sitting at companies that are getting pulled in should be doing right now, should be thinking, what should their steps be? And I'll just start with, I do not think that CISOs should put themselves into the decision-making process as a decision maker, but as an advisor providing the right information. But what else?
I would say ask the right questions, making sure all your concerns are being addressed, through legal representation, through the audit firms reviewing that and everything. Because we have what about the SEC case that fined these 4 companies? We can ask those type of questions to be like, have we considered that? Are we putting enough information that we're avoided out of that? I think that would be the role to me in the CISO, is to make sure those concerns are addressed.
Yeah. So the CISO should go review what the decisions were this week, go and look at the article that you found, look and see what the details were that were missing, and at least build into their plans to ask those questions.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would also suggest, run some tabletops specific to disclosures, right? Like, do it with your general counsel and your audit support and stuff like that. Evaluate whether or not if you self-assess whether or not you would disclose or would not disclose in certain situations at certain, thresholds of materiality or perceived thresholds of materiality, and how you would do that. Because if you get that kind of codified in a memo, well, now you can have, whatever it is, a handy table or something that when you're in the heat of battle, you can at least refer to and say, well, I know we're saying we don't want to disclose it now, but when we ran this exercise, when it wasn't a real thing 6 months ago, we said that, we probably need to put it in that section where we're not sure yet. So are we really sure? Because when we were in this evaluation and we weren't running around with our hair on fire, we came to a different conclusion. So I would think it's probably worth spending a couple cycles running some tabletops, getting comfortable, and whether you're codifying that in memos or results or something like that at a high level, just understand what you do with some of these things.
Yeah, and I think, United, when they had their big change, healthcare, they were doing a whole bunch of external meetings with customers, with a whole bunch of, relevant parties. I haven't seen a kind of a lessons learned out of that, but they were doing a whole bunch of communication into that. I'd like to see, how that kind of played in. Were they prepared for that? Did they do that on the fly?
Right.
Obviously you wouldn't want to do that for every, it depends on the how big the impact is, type of thing.
Yeah.
I don't even think you mentioned the one where they're, in the environment and got access to some customer data. There was no outage, so do you really need a whole bunch of external?
Was it a material impact?
Yeah.
Well, it didn't impact our service at all.
I think the day, week, month update iteration would probably be good. You inform the day, you inform a week later, you inform a month later, kind of clean up,
And here I just thought we might go through one episode without talking about tabletop exercises.
No, never going to happen. Yeah.
Those are important.
Refer to other ones. Yeah. So, moving on to any other topics on this here?
No, I think those are some good takeaways, and I just think everybody should take a look at those articles and build it in, and exercise it. Know what you're gonna at least have a game plan.
Yeah, great. Well, speaking of SEC and private companies and everything, you want to introduce the next topic here with M&As?
Well, yeah, I was just wondering what you all thought about how security reviews should be built in to the M&A process. So if you're gonna buy a company, and I get reached out to about this pretty frequently, and they're saying, "Hey, we're gonna look at this company. What can you do to help me take a look at their IT, their cybersecurity, and see if we can uncover any risks. And so I just want to kind of go around and see where do you start? What should you be considering? And what should be like the first couple of things, and then how does that drive the next couple of things? What do you think?
You want to start?
I'll start. Yeah. So I think first thing, I've done several of these from internal company and from consulting company like you're in, right now. I think the first thing to get aligned with the business is what do they intend to do with the organization? If they're going to buy and leave, type of thing, that's a whole different question strategy than to buy and integrate, into that. Like, you might not be worried about their endpoints, if you're going to swap them all and replace it to the standard image, type of thing. So there's a lot of things that go off the table if you're going to say, hey, they're going to adopt all our policies, they're going to be integrated with our Active Directory, whatever it is, like, if we're going to buy them and just leave them as their own company to operate of their own and flip them in a couple of years or whatever.
So that's good. Strategy. First question is context.
Yeah, exactly. Then that offers a way different scenario. I give this example when I worked at Diebel, and this predates me into this, but Diebel is famous for the voting machine incident. With that, what a lot of people don't realize is they bought that company and just left it alone.
Yeah.
They didn't, the core Diebold team was not involved in that organization's security program whatsoever.
Interesting.
Into that. And this, again, predates me, so, with this. But the end result was they bought it, they left them alone, they, just kind of let them operate the way they did. And then all of a sudden it's like, you have FTP going to the machines and a whole bunch of integrity problems, and it was a big brand hit. I mean, they're still known to this day for bad voting machines, and they divested all their stuff out of the States, into that. But they're still attached to that, type of
Interesting.
thing.
Yeah.
So again, knowing the context first off is where I would go. Into that.
So let's assume that you're going to you're going to buy it, you're going to let it run for a little while, and then you're going to slowly integrate it. So whether you slowly integrate it later or not worry about that part, but you're going to
start to integrate within a year. That's a typical time frame.
Yeah, you're going to put it in place. So then what areas are you looking at first?
I'll let you go. I talked.
So, I think one thing, even just to add to the context before we get there, is I think you need to understand, as the person responsible for security or compliance or whatever it is, what table do you have a seat at, right? Because if you have a seat at the table where all those decisions are actually being made, great, you can help control your own destiny, you can influence timelines and budgets and things like that. I've talked to a lot of security leaders in the past that don't have a seat at that specific table, right? They get told later, hey, we purchased this company and we need to have it integrated in 6 months or whatever. Or, or something in between. Hey, we purchased the company, now come up with the plan for integrating it. And so there's kind of those three scenarios.
By the way, you've been assigned to this project.
Right. It's
that's a concept I wasn't even thinking about, because the ones I'm dealing with, I'm talking to the owner who's going to sign the check to make the purchase.
Right.
Or we're brought in by the capital bank who is working directly with the owner in order to assess that part.
Yeah.
So let's keep going down the item where you're at, which is you're internal in a company.
Yep.
You find out it's there, and now
you're reacting, right?
Yeah.
So I guess I kind of start with the philosophy more than specific domains to go attack. But philosophically, the way that I look at this is there's kind of three major elements that are probably all related. One is, and how I frame this, you guys might feel like it's controversial at first, but I think you'll both agree with me at the end.
Yeah, I'll hear you out.
I think you need to understand where it's okay to move fast and break stuff.
Yeah.
Right? And really be bold in terms of your time frames right out of the gate, right? Because regardless of whether you're at the decision maker's table or you're being told that this is happening and you have to support it, the expectation is that you're going to help the business move forward with it, right? And you're not going to have all the resources you want necessarily. You're almost certainly not going to have all the time that you want or that your team wants, right? And so it becomes really critical to understand what are the things that are kind of acceptable collateral damage in terms of processes or technologies, and what are the things that are non-negotiables, must be like must be taken care of.
Can you give some examples on that?
Yeah.
I have examples in my head.
So like
yeah.
the one in my head of like the don'ts on both sides of the coin is like don't get paralyzed in terms of like trying to merge together two like data classification schemes or something, right? Because chances are that's a thing that unless you have super secret information that truly needs protected in certain ways, like you can fix a lot of that in post, right? If you're like, oh, in 6 months we need to integrate these networks and we know the company being acquired has business operations in an adversarial nation state and a super flat network, maybe you need to think about some of those technical security controls, right?
I was thinking something like way simpler. Just like if you go into their patch management, horrible, and you're not rip and replace, know, strategy. And basically I look at exposure, like how are you from the internet?
Yep.
You have MFA, where, everything locked down. How are you phishing protection? How are you, the most common attack pass, into that. And if they're keeping that needs to change.
Absolutely.
Very frequently. Type of thing.
So,
but if it's a developer company and they have keys in the development code, okay, we'll get to it.
We'll get there.
Type of thing.
So no, and you're likely going to have, at least at large enterprises, as the security leader, you're probably going to have a team where all these people are responsible for their own domains, and they're all running around with their hair on fire potentially because they all think this thing that's about to be integrated is a huge problem. It's your responsibility to know which ones like. It's acceptable to have some late nights and weekends fixing this later versus if this piece goes wrong, we're all sunk, right? Or we're like it's significant business damage. So I think that's the first thing. Know where you have to move fast, but know what's breakable and what's not. The second thing is no matter what you think it's going to cost, ask for 1.5 that. Like part of moving fast and being able
like
to
Murphy's Law of investment.
Yeah, like I mean, the cynical framing or phrasing is like you need to sandbag a decent amount because it's not going to go according to plan. It's just not. It never does. No big integration or implementation ever does. And if
you're pre in the negotiation and
if you can, right? But if you can't, you still need to set the expectations that hey, we're going to move fast and break things. We need everyone to be chill with us, and we might, we think we're going to need XYZ, but we might actually, but that's our minimum, viable resources. We're probably going to need 1.5 that because skeletons are going to fall out of closets that we don't expect.
Right.
So that's the second thing. Whatever you have in terms of resources, whatever you think you need in terms of resources, set the expectation that you probably will need 1.5 that. Because again, if you're moving fast and intending to break things, you might need to phone a friend, which costs money typically, to help fix some of those things in post.
And are we only talking about security or is this security IT kind of enjoying
I think
together?
it's security IT because honestly to me, that routes into the third thing.
Yeah, let's hear that.
Which is do what I think of as pre-mortems. Right? So this is where you do like the brain. It's just a risk analysis approach essentially, but it throws out all the constructs of like how you might typically do risk analysis. It's just to say, okay, we wake up on one Monday and this integration has gone horribly wrong. What happened and why? Right? And you start brainstorming the things that went wrong. And at the end of that, you kind of prioritize how wrong did it go? And at the end of that, these were the things that were really, really horrible, super bad for the business. These were the things that were kind of less bad or that we could fix in post. And then you use that to help you understand part one, which is, where you can move fast and where you can't move fast. So that's kind of my three principles though. It's like you have to be bold and move real fast, but you have to know what's important. You have to ask for more resources than you think you're going to need because you're going to need more than you think you're going to need. And do that pre-mortem with your team so that you can actually help sanity check them because again, if they're all responsible for their own domains, if you're lighting each of their worlds on fire, they're all going to scream equally as loud-ish depending on personality. But it's probably also true that the people screaming about, data classification in my example before, if there's not anything super secret and scary, they're screaming just as loud as the people, the network team being like, how can we plug this thing together? And you need to be able to help sanity check.
I really like that last one because it's really, it's almost like the risk assessment. It's what could go wrong. And let's start mapping out those items so we can In fact, that'll let you go faster for step one.
You measure twice on those things, right? And only measure once on all the other stuff.
And so the perspective I had was, or my baseline for this conversation was less about being an internal person, but you're the owner of a company. And now you need to go get some things done. What are you looking for somebody to come in and help you do? And so, and I think a lot of these are going to be similar to what you would do as an internal one. The first thing I'd worry about is what's the posture assessment? Like, first, I want to know if we're going to connect a network or buy somebody. This is even before we sign any paperwork. Before we buy, I want to get an assessment done. Like, are you breached right now and we don't even know it?
Right, like threat hunt.
Yeah. So I want to do some of that.
A lot more are actually doing that more commonly into the due diligence.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so
they don't want that debt coming in.
Absolutely. Like Vaughn scans, pen tests, incident breach history. In fact, finding out what kind, if you have like a CrowdStrike or an MDR, what's your reporting look like? Can I get a look at that? When's the last pen test? If not, let's get one. Let's do some scanning.
Yeah.
Let's do an application security assessment if they have a forward-facing web app, for example. And then, so that kind of gives me a perspective of, we'll hit that in a sec. That gives me a perspective of what's the technical look like right now.
Yeah.
And then the next thing I would do is start looking at the program. Is it a company big enough to have an actual ISMS, some kind of security program? And if you if you have findings from that first technical review, and then you start looking at the program, it will tell you whether or not those policies are even being enforced.
Right.
Depending on what you're finding.
Well, it brings up two things, and then I want to hear your story.
But
we'll get to that. Two very top line things in my head. Like a lot of that stuff almost distills down to like, what's the security philosophy of the organization being acquired, and is it compatible with our security philosophy?
Or it doesn't even matter. Like I said, if you're going to rip and replace, it doesn't even matter.
It's true. It might not. It might not.
Yeah.
But then the next element, or related to that, is, you know, we talk about like tech debt all the time, but very rarely do we talk about like process debt or people debt. And when you think people, process, technology, that's a third of it.
Like a lot of people don't spend enough time actually integrating culture.
Absolutely.
You know, into that.
Absolutely. And so, but I think like that process debt, which when you talked about the program, like that's kind of how I mentally frame that. And the people debt too, like if they've been like, you know, running at 110% for the last 10 years and effectively falling behind each year, or, you know, are they ready to go? Have they been empowered? All that stuff. And it kind of comes back up to philosophy. But I think that stuff from a top line really matters.
So back to your story.
Yeah, so I was part of giftcards.com, and we got acquired, you know, with that. And we were going through a whole bunch of, you know, due diligence and all that stuff. And one of the potential...
You're not under NDA here, are you?
No.
Okay, just making sure.
It expired. Right? It's not that anything that serious. But one of the things that was actually funny was they reached out, it was Q4. And if you don't know the gift card business, you make most of your money between like October and December.
What is it, like 70%, 80%?
40, 50% of the entire year.
Still, that's
is made in those like 2 months.
Last quarter.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, that's a big chunk. So, oftentimes we go into like, don't change anything,
change freeze,
nothing broken,
yeah.
you know, and one of the due diligence companies is like, hey, we're going to do a pen test against you in Q4. I'm like, whoa. We need to coordinate on this. I'm not saying no, but I need to understand what you're doing and where's the contact if something starts to happen.
Right, 'cause if you knock something down, it's big problems,
like, I mean,
right
again,
away.
it's like we get millions upon millions of dollars, you know, like with this. And it coming through, and I finally get on the phone with the potential buyer, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we're just gonna run like Nmap on your server." I'm like, all right, knock yourself out.
The bad guys are doing that all day long anyway.
We have a bug bounty program, all right?
Right.
So it was just like, oh yeah, no,
that is
cool. It was very humorous to me that it was like, they're like, oh, we're going to do a pen test. And then they come out like, can we do a port scan? I'm like,
yeah, sure. Go for it.
But I think like all that program health stuff you mentioned, right? And even getting into like, you know, how much are you really assessing your third parties or your dependencies and all that stuff? Because you're going to inherit all these different things.
You took one of the things I had in here was, you know, supply chain security.
Yeah.
So taking a look at that, that was the last out on my list, but I'm good jumping ahead on that because you're going to be buying all of their and then there's probably another kind of debt for that. But,
Yeah, right.
What is that? And so you'll have that. The other things I would look at is things like, well, are they using M365? Are they using, what cloud security are they using? And I don't know that even after a company has deliberately went through and tried to make sure their cloud security, their M365 is locked down and configured, when our teams go through it, and I'm sure you've all seen this too, you still find ways to improve it.
Yep.
So how bad is it? And let's do a configuration review of those most critical tools. And then
if they're going to maintain that. But oftentimes, well, I guess, it comes back to the strategy.
Depends, yeah.
Right.
You know, type of thing like...
Well, I'll get to why you'd want to do it anyway. And we'll talk about...
Well, isn't that breach hunting, you know, type of thing? Or
It is, but it's for a different reason.
Okay.
The reason you might look at those things, even if you're not going to use them, discounting.
Yeah, I was going to say,
your
on the price.
acquisition
Well, and this is where it comes down to the bottom line when you're doing this due diligence is it's not a no, it's a how much, you know, type of thing. And if you can build that cost into it, it gives, you know, the negotiators a little bit more power, you know, to say, hey, we got to invest all this to like integrate with it. So we need to knock the price down or...
And that's actually a thing I'd say, if you are a security leader that doesn't currently have a seat at that table, right? It's worth working with your, you know, CFO or CEO or strategy officer or whatever it is to say, hey, look, I understand we're in an acquisition phase or an acquisition mode. I know we're looking to make sure that we get the best deal possible and don't end up buying a bunch of problems that then we have to pay to fix. If you include me on the front end of this, where I can help do some of these evaluations, or at least say we need these evaluations and say, hey, no, you're not allowed to do it, then okay, well, we're going to increase our fee, right? You can actually impact the sale price, potentially, sometimes pretty significantly, depending on what's going on.
And that's where I think you need to have, you know, a voice in the ear of some of those people, like, because I've seen just industries decimated on acquire and leave, you know, type of thing. Like they've just grown organically collecting revenue, and then their infrastructure is so diverse. It's, you know, it's its own islands. There's no central management of it. Everybody's responsible for their own little things, you know. It is a nightmare to deal with, especially when you start getting into security and compliance. They're like, I don't know, that's that group. I don't know, that's that group and everything. And all of a sudden it's like, we need to shift culture here and then get a 5 to 10 year plan, you know, to get everybody on the same page.
Yeah. But there's a billion financial reasons to do it, though, whether it's, you know, labor efficiency or buying power for software licenses or, you know, or just, you know, like you said, you're buying and inheriting potential security.
But a lot of people look at it as like, I'm collecting revenue now and leaving them alone. So it's cheaper
it's not
for me.
broke, don't fix
I don't
it.
have to put work into it, you know, type of thing. Yeah. But it's like, are you going to put work in it now or later? You know, is really when it comes down to it.
Yeah.
So.
Well, that all makes sense. And the last thing I'd look at would be identity and access reviews.
Oh, for sure.
How well, which is another indicator of how well they're maintaining things. If you go on and you do a quick look at their users and compare it to who's in the HR system, and you find a whole bunch of people with active accounts, that's going to be an indicator of probably a whole lot of other problems.
Yeah, that's a hygiene issue.
Yeah. And so when I'm doing these, it's not super expensive to do, and you don't go super deep on it either.
Right.
You're basically looking for what are some red flags that will be indicators that we might have some problems here, and we need to understand a little bit more. And that might then take you into the path of what to do next. And one of those next things might be, well, let's go ahead and see how much this is going to cost us to fix, get that discount. And I see you want to say something, and so I'll hand it over to you and you come back.
Well, I was going to say, I really, really love that point, because the goal is not necessarily to know all of the issues. It's to have a general understanding of, is it very, very bad, or just kind of bad, or mediocre, or pretty good?
I mean, it's the same thing going over their finances. You know, like
Absolutely.
gauging it from a risk perspective.
Exactly
you
right.
know?
Yeah.
So let's flip it. You're the company. You're selling your company. What do you want to do to make sure that you're solid so that you don't get discounted?
Yeah, I mean, all that same stuff, but in advance, right?
Right.
And frankly, you can do it yourself, but probably it makes sense to pay someone to do it on your behalf.
Well, we could do it ourselves, type
Well,
of
we
thing.
could, but even if it's a
yeah.
company that I'm selling, I'd probably want someone else an independent party to do it so that I can say, hey, this is not my letterhead. It's this company, this respected company's letterhead that says I didn't just grade myself and tell you everything's good.
I've actually got virtual CISO contracts because of that.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Type of thing, that they're going to look to be on the market or something like that, and they just need an extra security arm, into there, type of thing. So, yeah, I think, and try to centralize, like a lot of people try to invent their own stuff and be, with that. And it's like, no, just go use, Microsoft 365. Like, that's the best solution, or Google or whatever it is. Get all centralized, get into something where you get central reporting. You don't have to spend a ton of money. Just get it all into one place.
That's a really good point, too. Like, streamline your architecture and your tooling and your stack. Yeah.
Like, a lot of this stuff, I mean, obviously, I'm a 3-person company, counting myself. But, we all centralize on Google authentication. I create an email account for everybody with that.
Yeah.
And all the tools that we use authenticate through Google. I can terminate, everybody. There's a couple of apps that don't do that. But, you keep track of those. And that's the thing. But now it's easy, with that. So,
So did you have extra things that you would do if you're selling that are different than if you're buying?
Not really. I would still do the same thing. I'm like, how can I? But everything is with the idea that I can create assurance.
Right.
So what is the, yes, please. What is the best way to lay out that? Oh, we'll get to this in a moment and see why he only wants a touch. But how would I lay it out so that I can, it's basically getting audit ready. And my auditor happens to be, in this case, the buyer.
Right.
And so how can I give assurance that we're doing all the things that we should be doing to make our price, the high price I want to
get a pen test?
Yeah.
Or a port scan?
Yeah, probably not a port scan.
Well, I was going to say,
probably not a port scan.
It's kind of like a vendor questionnaire in terms of getting the assurance, which is a perfect segue to the next topic, potentially.
Yeah.
Well, we got to talk about.
Oh, that's right. Talk about movies first, too.
So, but anyway, that to kind of wrap it up and put a bow on that, you have, what's technically could be wrong.
Yeah.
And let's make sure that we don't have those problems. And then how can I support that my technical stuff is working through the proper policies and governance and program?
Yeah.
Because without the policies and governance and program, no matter what you fix, it'll degrade later if you don't have a process to keep it good.
Right.
So how are we doing that? And then what are the other indicators of a risky environment? Yeah. Not maintaining identities, not having third party patching, not having third parties, knowing who you're outsourcing to, and those kinds of things.
There might be actually one thing that if you're selling, you need to do, but if you're buying, I mean, I guess it's still an indicator, but you'd want to make sure that your team is fully aware of, I don't want to say what the story is, but what the actual reality is. Because if these interviews are happening or these assessments are happening and people walk away with 2 or 3 different stories across 2 or 3 different people on your team, well, those are problems, right? So it's always good to make sure that your whole team knows what's going on, but operational reality.
Sometimes a lot of companies try to keep that under wraps.
Right.
They're selling.
Well, right, but making sure that you're so there might be a bit of a needle to thread here, right? In terms of making sure that your team understands the most up-to-date, not story, but reality in terms of your program, especially if you've been cleaning up some things over time.
Yeah, because consistent talking points. That's just standard audit prep.
It is.
20-some years ago, 30 years ago, when we were just starting to go through SOX audits, year 0, we were getting coached by the accounting firms, the firms that were helping us.
Yeah.
Here's what you say to the auditor. Here's what you don't say. That would be no different for this if you're the company getting bought. And prepping.
But potentially, again, depending on that company's what they've gone through in the past, they may or may not have that capability locked down already.
Yeah, and I would think the senior person would be the point person, just to make sure that there's one voice.
Maybe, but whenever I've pushed in the past, whenever I've been part of the acquisition team in the past, I've always pushed to talk to a wide variety of people just for that reason.
Yes.
Yeah.
And from the other side of it, if you're going to get bought, don't go it alone.
Right.
Bring somebody like one of the three of us in,
Yeah.
sit down and actually get your game plan together.
You're right. Yeah.
Yep. Good topic.
How about that bourbon?
How about that bourbon?
What about that bourbon? You said
So-
you either hate it or love it.
And you're in the middle.
You can't be.
You're a renegade.
So,
It happens.
yeah.
So for this one, we got Barrel Seagrass. So this is one that a lot of people have mixed feelings about. It is rye whiskey finish in Margantine rum, Mandaria, and apricot brandy barrels. I don't know. I'm sure I'm butchering that.
Martinique rum,
Martinique, yeah.
Madeira, and apricot brandy barrels.
Yeah. So it's a very unique blending of this. 119 proof, which is, we all agreed that it's a little hot on the
It was. That
intake
first
and
sip.
everything.
But actually, I'm surprised but it drinks smoother than 119. I
Yeah.
would say that. Yeah.
I would say that, yeah. And then once it settles into the back taste, you get that kind of grapefruit.
Oh, it's a fruit bomb. It's
Yeah.
an extra
yeah.
sherry
It's a little bit
cask.
sweeter.
Oh,
Yeah, a lot of different flavors happen on the back and everything. So yeah, I think it's a combination of that brandy and that grapefruit. It's interesting. And then with that rye, you got that kind of,
Peppery.
Yeah, I always like to just sip it first, and then I like to add ice and see how it changes.
Yeah.
And every time I drink something, I add a little bit of ice, just a chip of ice. I can notice a difference.
Yeah.
And this opened up nicely. It was much less hot after.
See, I started
after
with
that.
it. I started with a couple chips of ice, and I liked this to start, and as I drink it, I like it more and more and more.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, like I said, it's a very unique flavor profile. It's not just like, Angel's Envy with like sherry cask. It's a very simple flavor additive, into that. This has a very unique combination of flavors.
Are they in Louisville?
They are. Barrel Craft Spirits, Louisville, Kentucky.
No.
So, and they make a lot of good different type of spirits. And
I don't think I'd have a barrel craft before.
No,
I like this.
yeah.
Yeah.
All right, cheers, guys. Yeah.
Cheers to episode 6,
Yeah.
and thanks for everyone who's listening.
All right. So, getting a little fun here.
Let's do it.
Favorite security movies, like something cybersecurity focus was into it, and why?
Okay.
Or most hated. You can go
Yeah.
most hated
Well, we
as
had a
well.
Most
whole
hated's interesting.
list.
There was a big list.
Yeah. Well, I have them. I don't know that I hate it, but we'll get to it later. So
Okay.
we'll come back to it. It's down further on my list, but I don't know. I'm always a big fan of war games. Watched it with my
war games,
kids
very
recently after going many years between watching it, and it's just
Do you wanna play a game?
yeah, it's just a really fun one. Anybody else got comments on war games?
No, I mean, it's just super solid. I haven't seen it in a while. I probably need to give it another watch now
I
that
have
I'm
a
a
fun
little
fact.
older. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. This movie led to the creation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act in 1986.
Really?
I did not know that until I
didn't
started
know that either.
looking at that today, and it popped up, and I'm like, wow, I got to share this.
So the
That's
movie said,
interesting.
there's people that put the phone down on a receiver and go, into other systems.
The system said welcome, but nevertheless, the computer, the CFAA is all about getting onto a computer,
Yeah.
having authorization to get onto it, but abusing your access.
Right.
And so what
Good
happened?
thing we have those
That's so
banners.
interesting.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. The banner came up. Didn't it say welcome?
Well, yeah, you're right. Because the kid was looking for games, right? That was the
Yeah.
whole thing.
Yeah,
And
he's war
like,
dialing
oh,
and jumping around a whole bunch,
Yeah.
and then he found the military one.
But he thought it was a game, and then
Yep.
he started doing stuff, and then they thought it was Russia.
Yeah, because
That's the
they
gist
had
of it,
like
right?
tic-tac-toe,
Right.
nuclear, thermodynamic war, war.
yeah,
And you're like,
yeah.
oh, that looks fun.
And how about a nice game of chess? So, but
I
instead,
love Civilization. It's a great game.
yeah, but instead, he knew he was doing something that was exceeding the authorization he had, and so that's where the
Interesting.
Abuse Act came from
I did not know.
I
He was
was
changing the
weird.
grades in
in his own school.
yeah, he definitely was
Yeah.
there. So
yeah.
I think that definitely introduced probably a generation into like cybersecurity, into that. So
Uh-huh.
I thought that was pretty
Yeah, that's a
interesting.
good one.
Well, and
What's
then
another one?
so I will say similar to that, but it's not my favorite. Hackers, introduced with that. But my favorite, all-time favorite hacker movie is Sneakers.
I love Sneakers.
Oh yeah, I would say it's probably my favorite.
Get Out. So like, there's so many things good with it. And I mean, obviously, it's far-fetched from the box that can break any security algorithm, encryption algorithm out there and everything. But the concepts and how they break into stuff, it's just like, it's almost like real world, and how they break into the bank at the beginning, and everything. How I love the one scene where the guy was like, where he got past his security guard by having the balloons and cake,
dude.
And just the annoyance of a social engineering finally buzzed him in.
Absolutely.
And then he couldn't when they get key cards, and everything, or whatever it was, and he's like, I might have a solution. And they just kicks open the door.
It's also just a great
I can't believe that worked.
It's also just a great caper movie.
Yeah.
It's just really well put together.
It is good. And so that's the one where I have a couple quotes I wrote down for this one. Anybody remember the line, "My voice is my passport.
Oh, yeah.
Verify me."
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
C-Tech Astronomy.
That was Dr. Werner Brands was the character.
Where they had to go on a date to record all the voices.
Yeah.
I want a C-Tech t-shirt now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was like,
that'd be a good
you know
deep
what
cut
word
shirt.
I would love you to say? Passport.
Yeah.
I've seen so many Facebook ads for these really unique shirt quotes from these 1980s
Like deep cut.
movies.
Yeah. Really cool.
Here's another quote from the movie. "There's a war out there, old friend, a world war. And it's not about who's got the most bullets. It's about who controls the information."
When did that come out?
That one in
It's in the
1992.
80s, right? 92, okay.
92.
Gotcha. My one of the things that I loved about some of this stuff. So if you remember when Robert Redford went to go, the guy that invented that box, he went to go visit the lecture, into there, and the guy was talking with notes that he'd written on a clear thing and was showing on the slide rule and everything. So fun fact about that: first off, they had it in a PowerPoint presentation. They hired Alderman, which RSA, the A is Alderman. They hired him as a consultant onto that, and they're like, yeah, mathematicians don't do that. They just write it onto there. So they switch it to that, and that was all his written math, and all the math makes sense onto there.
Really?
And his condition on doing some of this stuff, I guess his wife was a big Robert Redford fan. So in the audience, it was Alderman and his wife were sitting in the
classroom.
In the classroom there.
Oh, I didn't
way.
know that
There.
part. That's cool.
Yeah.
I knew they had him as a consultant on, but that's super cool.
Yeah,
I didn't know
it was one of the conditions of it, working into that. So stuff like that is that's cool.
awesome.
Yeah. Now, and I did say Sneakers was my favorite movie, but when it comes to TV shows, let's throw that in here too. Mr. Robot.
Yeah.
You didn't like it as much?
So
I
watched
loved it.
I watched a handful
I'm embarrassed
of
to
the
say I need to
episodes.
watch
I
it.
watched a handful of episodes and it kind of dropped off.
Oh, I
Just
watched
like,
every one,
Yeah.
and then my son, who's 18 years old now and at college, a year or two ago, we sat down and watched the whole thing again.
I need to
and he
binge it.
loved it.
Yeah.
And because he loved it, I loved it so much more sitting there going through it.
Oh, that's
It was just good.
Yeah. Everyone tells me great things about it, except for you. You're the first person I've actually heard say.
really? Yeah.
But you didn't watch the whole thing.
No, I was only 3 or 4 episodes in, and it kind of dropped off and everything.
I would say, as far as ones that haven't been mentioned yet, 2 of my favorites that are probably close enough to be considered, Johnny Mnemonic.
Okay. Yep.
Right? It gets into that biotech, biohacking thing, but the concept of encryption and sneaker nets effectively and stuff like that, and moving data around, physically, because you can't trust, how it moves around digitally. I think there's some neat stuff there. It's also just a super fun movie.
Yeah.
I saw it a long time ago and I don't remember it, so now I have to go watch it again.
Yeah, so the gist of it is the way that things work in the future is people have these cybernetic implants, and
Was this a Keanu movie?
it is, yeah. And you and basically there are these people that move data by putting it in their own head and then physically going to the place and then getting it out of their head, but it's encrypted and they blank out when it happens and all this stuff. It raises some cool stuff. But anyway, the Yakuza gets involved in ruins this data courier's whole thing for a while, and so
they overload his brain. They give him too much, and he has to get to like where he can empty it. But it's like messing with him the entire movie.
I mean, it's probably like it's peak 90s wackiness in some ways, but like they're like giving dolphins heroin at one point and stuff like that. It's the whole thing. But I like that one. Ghost in the Shell is another one. It's an anime actually, and it's a similar kind of thing in a way, but basically they figure out how to like move consciousnesses around. So like you could upload your consciousness out of your body, your shell, and your consciousness is called a ghost. You can like put it in the internet or move it back to bodies and stuff like that. And so there's this hacker effectively that is taking over people's identities and jumping around, and they're going after the hacker and stuff like that. So I don't know. There's some neat stuff there, I think, in terms of identity and in reality and the digitization of things. That's super neat. So
yeah, that's cool. And well, I'd be remiss without saying hack the Gibson, which goes back to Justin already bringing up hackers, but not in a way that seemed like you liked it too much.
I mean, it's all right. I think a lot of people overblow it.
It's a big hit of like nostalgia dopamine for me. Yeah. Like I can still hear like a lot of songs in the sound. Like I can summon songs from the soundtrack in my head and stuff like that.
Well, and it's always funny. Like when they're like, everybody suit up. We're like, we're going in. Put on your VR goggles. It's like, all right. It's hard to be.
Well, it's fun. I was thinking about Tron when we were thinking about this, and if you want to go like maybe not exactly how computers work, but good fun, good movie.
Yeah.
About Tron, I didn't know this. I guess it was like a good chunk of it was inspired by the game Pong. Like,
really?
Yeah.
I can see that.
Yeah. And then they got into like the light cycle thing because the whole thing ended up being like the games within the computers and rogue programs and stuff like that. So it's fun, but yeah, that I think might have single-handedly damaged a lot of people's perception of how computers work.
Right.
Have you ever seen Lawnmower Man?
Oh yeah, it was I think the first R-rated movie I ever saw.
So that movie, again, another one my son and I decided to watch. And the parts that just kind of blow my mind now are the very weird graphics that you come up with from the, I don't even know when that movie was made, 90s, I guess?
It's got to be 90s, because like that Windows 95 cutting edge, because it's like a person's face, but it looks like it's wrapped around a cylinder.
Yeah.
And
the guy trying to break out, and then he's shooting the attempts through all the different ports.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's not even the worst one of them all. The worst one. What's your worst one?
I don't even know. I'd have to think really hard.
And there are a lot of bad ones.
I'm going to go with The Net.
Oh, The Net was up there.
Sandra Bullock, right?
Yeah.
So that was from 1995.
You have to look for the pi sign down the bottom of the web browser.
And here's the thing here's why I love to hate that movie, is did you ever notice the impossible IP addresses that were shown on the screen?
Oh, really?
Like I noticed this, and it was such an irritant. So I had to look it up today, and one of the IP addresses was 23.75.345.200. What's wrong with that?
345.
345. That octet is not possible. And then they also list another one.
Know? It could be a secret government routing.
Or is 345 like Hollywood's version of starting a phone number with 555 because it doesn't exist?
That's pretty much what it is.
Oh, is it really?
And then I that's what I read today.
Okay.
And the other thing was 75, 748, 86, 91. So 748 as your second octet.
Yeah.
So if you're not a nerd, you're not going to get this. But so those were the things that you're watching on the screen. You're sitting there with somebody who has no idea, and you're like, this movie sucks. They're like, why? Did you see that octet?
That's so funny. But it's not. It can't just be the IP address, fake IP address schemes that makes it the worst. What makes it the worst? I don't know. What makes it the worst? Is it just a bad movie?
You know what? I hate when they just grossly simplify the cybersecurity industry. Like, let me try and hack in. Okay, I'm in.
Oh.
It's like,
the concept of like,
there's a low war.
It's like, is that like NCIS or whatever, where you click really loud on the keyboard for a while and then, all right, I'm in.
Yeah.
Like,
And this is at least a PG podcast, so we can't talk about swordfish and the hacking. So anyway,
fair enough.
Swordfish and everything. Actually, I didn't mind the what was the movie? Is it Live Free or Die Hard? One of the Die Hards where they hacked everything.
Yeah.
That was actually a pretty good one. And what's his name? Silent Bob was the mega hacker, in the basement and everything. Yeah. I enjoyed more the concept of it, that, the fire sale where they brought down the different industries and basically exploited a backup that the government, had in case of a...
So like a backdoor?
Yeah, so they basically, after a whole bunch of bad stuff happened, they downloaded all the financial information into a few secret places. And then they knew of that, so they went and basically stole all it.
Manipulated it, yeah.
So, I mean, the concept is very interesting, there, type of thing. But,
that's cool.
Yeah.
Well, if you're watching and you're looking at this on YouTube, go and post your favorite movie in the comments. We really want to see what that is.
Yeah, especially if it's one we haven't talked about.
Yeah. And also the one you hated the most, because I'm very interested to know what that is, because I'll probably enjoy it.
Yeah.
So I'll go watch it.
Yeah, I mean, you watch it, you hate it, type of thing.
That's fair.
We got about 5 more minutes till the hour. Do you want to dive into that last topic there?
We can hit on it and maybe pick it up even more later.
Yeah, sounds good. So, questionnaires that companies get. So, we're not talking about questionnaires sending out. That's third-party risk management. But you as an organization getting all the due diligence. We talked a little bit about due diligence today in the form of M&A.
Yeah.
But even if we're not selling, or buying, we're bombarded with due diligence, How are you doing? Tell me the security. Even me, as a sole practitioner of consulting, I get these questionnaires, do you have a SOC 2? Do you have this? I'm like, it's just me. Come on, guys. And I write up I have a 3-paragraph thing. It's I use Google, I patch everything, I use MFA. Right. What else do you want? I don't say what else you want, but it implies
and plus, I don't want any of your data. I don't.
Exactly.
I want to log into your system.
Don't give me any access.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I won't have access. I won't have this and all that stuff. But anyways, dealing with this, and they're all different. How do you deal with all of that without telling the customer to go pound salt,
Well, I think you brought up a very good point.
Sand, salt, whatever.
I think you brought up a very good point. Are you, and what should you do if you're a one-person solopreneur kind of doing this? I think you got a very good approach. You have a very small landscape of things to protect in order that you can demonstrate.
Yep.
And so how do you get that done? And how do you convey that? And what do you want them to do that minimizes everybody's time? But then you have the next level, and are there more than one more level? Tell me. Your 10-person company, 10 to 100-person company, and then you have your enterprises. So I think they're all a little bit different in what the expectations will be.
Well, and I don't think it breaks down in the method of size of the company. It's your clients that you're going after, because I know, depending on the industry you're in, sometimes it doesn't really matter. But if you're pre-revenue, I've worked with a couple of clients that they're pre-revenue startup companies, 30 people. But they're trying to appear into the fintech finance area, and they're we can't even start without all this stuff.
And the same with processing healthcare data.
Yeah, exactly. It's a no-go to get into some of these clients without some of this due diligence done, type of thing. So depending on where you're at, it doesn't even matter the size of the company. If you're going to a certain market that's highly regulated, they're going to expect all their customers to have this in place already. You're not going to get past start there, type of thing.
Yeah. I think as far as strategies for dealing with it, right? It's it's going to be a lot of the basic stuff. Come with make sure you have defined your standard response, whether it's 3 or 4 paragraphs or pages of third-party documentation that say, hey, we did this pen test and this controls assessment and this, that, and the other. Make sure you have that. Make sure it's up to date. All that stuff. If you can, right? It's I know people are not experimenting. Some people have had varied success with kind of automated solutions in terms of like leveraging a portal with a chat bot that can reference policies, right? I mean, people have been doing it forever.
Like a trust portal type of thing, like the Vanna and Doradas have.
Something like that,
yeah.
but it doesn't even necessarily have to be like that. I mean, tech support's been doing this for years and years and years, right? In terms of, have you type in your question in the chat, hey, can I help you with anything? Yeah, my computer's not working. Have you turned it on and off again? Like, I mean, there's no reason you can't do a compliance support portal in that way. And I know a couple clients that have had varying success with that. But I think an under-leveraged strategy, again, when you start to get into the enterprise space, where there's a bunch of different teams watching these things, is kind of shifting the burden left to an extent so that you're empowering your salespeople with that internal portal and with all the documentation and stuff like that. And you say, hey, look, we, the compliance team, which is typically like this big, we're going to manage and maintain and support you when weird stuff happens, right? And help you fight battles. But you guys take the first swing, right? Don't be reliant on us to understand the security posture. Here's all the answers, and we'll help support you.
I didn't want salespeople ever to answer questionnaires. That was one of the things that at Diebold we actually took.
You took back.
Yeah, we took, because, I mean, you look at it, salespeople will say yes to anything. They'll answer inaccuracy. They'll answer stuff that's not what
they're motivated to get the deal done.
Yeah,
they
exactly.
Are, but I do think there's this.
And we set up an SLA for like 3 days. Like, you give it to us, we'll finish it in 3 days. They were happy to deal with that.
I think that's fair, but I do think there's this natural pendulum that swings in terms of fully decentralized security to fully centralized security to decentralized but managed and overseen security, right? So I guess I'm talking about late stage maturity to an extent in terms of shifting.
And I agree with
left.
you. Like, give them the artifacts that they can dish out to the customers and everything.
Take the first swing.
Yeah, exactly. So if they're asking for a SOC 2, here's our SOC 2. Like, you don't need to involve me into that.
But even like the basic password policy stuff, like they should be able to say, like, oh, how often do you do incident response? Like, they should have typically. And again, if you can manage the process, right? If it's fully unmanaged and the sales team has basically always owned it and had no oversight, yeah, you probably need to start to fix that. Right? But if you've pulled it all in and now you're overwhelmed, right? Well, you've built the patterns in terms of responding. You just don't have the manpower to do it.
Right.
So you can start to apply those patterns back, give those patterns back to the business, say, look, here's how we answer these things, right? We've already done a bunch of these. You can roll some of these things forward. We're going to keep you up to date on what's there. Here's the internal trust portal with the chat bot.
I like that. So the concept of the portal says, let's all collaborate in the same place.
Right.
Have something to work with. There's systems out there you can get that help you manage this.
Right.
The part that we didn't talk about yet is take a risk-based approach.
Oh, yeah.
And so sometimes it's going sometimes it's going to the customer and saying, well, here's what we do for you, and you're giving me your same questionnaire that you're giving to this company that does about 10 times more with your most critical data. And if you're not that customer, then, well, what risks are you trying to manage? You might have that conversation, and that conversation may actually eliminate a lot of unnecessary work.
Yeah.
And so you could say,
in the long term, not just short-term work, work year after year after year.
Right, because if they've gotten to the point they're giving you that critical, that high caliber of a questionnaire, they probably have you on a cycle. Well, if you don't belong on the yearly cycle, get yourself on the bi-year or the twice or every other year or the every 3-year cycle. And if you've already invested in things like, so here's what kills me. You invest in a SOC 2, you get your ISO 27001 certification, and yet you give them that, and they still give you the 300 question.
Yeah, you have to answer it in our way.
What exactly did I save by getting these external stamps of approval for my program? Nothing. So
wait a minute, do you ever tell the customer no at that point?
You actually have a conversation.
A little bit.
Yeah, I do.
Well, I mean, Microsoft does. They say, we're not talking to you.
Well, they're big enough.
You go download. Right.
AWS is like, here's our due diligence base.
Yeah. Self-serve.
But it is exactly what you're saying. Like, look, our product/service is this, right? We can appreciate you have these risks when you're using us. Here's how we address those risks.
I love that.
If you have other stuff, right? If you have other concerns, well, they're probably not applicable, right? Or let's at least talk about that.
Let's talk about them.
Because I think this was absolutely one of my points. Like, people don't push back, and it's bad for both parties. But the reason the companies that send out these questionnaires get into those spaces because they have what are typically fairly junior people, right? Sending out these questionnaires, and they don't have the experience or the authority to assess how
see the
risky
same thing all the time. 100% agree.
your
or
product
small
is.
people with big attitudes. I've seen that a lot.
That's true.
Too. Like,
But so
they're like, you will answer my questionnaire or else.
Yep.
We had somebody at Diebold, not mentioning any names, but we had this set process. We worked a lot to get everything what you mentioned optimized, repeatable, in context of the services we're providing to the customer. We had this one credit union reach out to us. They wanted all of our policies, all this stuff and everything. It was like, nope, we're giving you a summary of your policies. Here's table of contents. Here's this, here's that.
Right.
Here's the due diligence you requested. The owner of the credit union came back and like, that is unacceptable. I know your CFO. I'm going to contact him.
I'm telling Dad.
This is awful. Yeah, we went talk to the CFO like, hey, just a heads up, this is happening. He's like, okay.
Yeah.
Like, it was nothing.
And at the end of the day, you take company names out of it. I don't want to get in the middle of that.
Right.
But will the buyer actually decide, in this case, not to use that company because they couldn't get more information?
Rarely. If you're already at the stage where you're doing a questionnaire, it's typically because initially they've either decided on you. Well, like I've never seen those questionnaires utilized as a real decision point in terms of what people are buying.
I've only slightly seen it used, but it never happened at that part of the process.
Right.
It was always at the due diligence phase.
Right.
Same kind of question.
Yeah, you could theoretically rewind it a little. Yeah. So I do think you need to, I think you push back. I think it's extraordinarily rare, unless you have something that's super bad, that a buyer is going to walk, because you have a bad answer. Typically, even that's a conversation and a negotiation around, well, what are you going to do to minimize my risk if you're not going to change your thing?
Right. I'm not sending you all of our policies. However, I'll screen share, but you need to sign this NDA that says you're not screenshotting everything I'm putting on my.
I'll tell you the whole thing. Like, what do you want to know? Like, let's talk about it. I'll also say, but part of that pushback, typically, depending on who the buyer is, if they're a large organization, it also means, very kindly saying, thank you very much, Mr. or Mrs. Analyst, but I do need to talk to the person who is, the actual risk, the risk manager, the person who actually can decide this is okay or this is not okay. Because it's not always very rarely in large organizations the person sending
you hit the nail on the head. Somebody who has our level of experience is designing this program, then is being executed by people they delegate it to, who are told, go figure this out.
Right. And they want to manage, the people who design the program, they want to manage by exception. Right?
Yeah.
So they're having all the analysts go do the things, and whenever someone gives you a tough time or whatever, bubble it up to me and we'll take care of it. And then, so if you can have the conversation with that person, I've never seen this. I will not say that people have always 100% agreed with me, but I've never had a situation where I've pushed back and there wasn't some reasonable accommodation of, yeah, you're right, our risks are actually here. We're going to lower the burden to this extent. It might not be exactly where I think it should be, but it's less than what it was.
I always love finding the takeaways that we should share at the end of this part of the conversation. What's the takeaways for doing your...
Before that, I actually have a funny story. So on the other side of that, so when I was at B1ML, I spent a year with a third-party risk management. And we outsourced, we had thousands on our vendor list that we measured on 1, 2, 3 year increments. But we did we did about 100, 120 a year that we did on site. And we outsourced that to another company where we, hired a consulting company, go on site for 2 days, go through the questionnaire, answer all of it. Then we get on the phone at the end of that and review some of the findings and everything. We had one. It was hilarious. Mentioning to the analysts, brings it up. They cited this one company that they were not educated on how to use the fire extinguishers. And I'm like, isn't it printed on the side? They're like, well, yeah, but they didn't receive
know. It wasn't
actual training on it. I'm like, I don't care. Move on.
Right.
So that's a risk-based. That's a risk-based approach that really didn't hit a risk you were probably worried about.
But they asked your poor vendor all those questions.
I know.
And they should have pushed back probably.
We had a conversation with our consulting company, like, come on, guys. Like, come on.
Yeah. But so takeaways.
Yeah, I like the risk-based. Take a risk-based
100%.
approach.
Yep.
Push back, which seems to me to be a common theme that we hit on before, which is
I think standardized
tailoring. Go ahead.
Standardize first. So
Standardize your responses.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, right.
Like get your ducks in a row. Like one of the things.
Create a library. Create
Here's how we're responding to all the things. Like one of the things that we did in one of the companies is like we had in the financial sector, SIG questionnaires were a thing.
Yeah.
So we just made full SIGs for some of our services. And so no matter what the format that we got in, it could be a Word document, just type questions. We're like, here's our full SIG. You let us know what we're missing. Like if you have any other questions, let us know.
Right.
I like that.
Yeah.
And now there's software tools. We didn't even get into this there's a whole other conversation to be had. There's software out there. And now with AI, there's software. Some of these compliance automation tools will take it, map it to the controls we already have demonstrated, and we'll create the responses. You have to validate it, and then you hit send, and it goes back.
Right.
And those blend into the trust portals as well. So I'd be remiss not talking about don't let this be a manual process.
Right.
It's now time to let the computers do the work, and then you deal with the exceptions.
Yeah.
But anyway, aside from that.
Yeah. And then to your point, what you're alluding to is pushback. Like once you have that standardized process, you've given that initial thing. It might not be exactly what
his
they want.
point.
No, but you were talking about pushing back.
Yeah.
A little bit, type of thing.
Tailor it, push back.
Like give them what they like. Your standard response. If they start saying, "Well, you didn't answer exactly my questionnaire," it's like, yeah, but I gave you like 300 questions of exactly what you're.
And you don't have to be a jerk, but make sure you're talking to the right person because that analyst probably isn't the person that sent it is rarely the person that can accept serious, significant deviances or say, oh yeah, we'll just send you a different questionnaire. They probably can't.
We floated around. We were talking to sub-board committee and everything. At one point, we were talking about charging nominally of customers that insisted we fill out a questionnaire. After we sent them like the full SIG and all that stuff, they're like, no, you must do it in our format. You're like, all right, it's $800.
We batted that.
It's like a nuisance charge to some of our services. Like, but if you're really serious, like
that's not the first time I heard that.
Yeah, we batted that.
We never executed on it, but it was a serious thought.
I've seen that batted around at a couple places I've worked at before. Yeah, and frankly, what happened in some of those cases was the charge wasn't an upfront charge, but it was tagged onto the price tag on the back end.
Yeah, if you really want this, like we'll give you a whole bunch of information that's included in this, but if you ask us to do work,
this is going to take an extra 8 hours a year to deliver on this regular
to
engagement.
Answer your specific questionnaire. Yeah.
Well, I've actually had those conversations where you're filling out the questions, you're getting back to the people on time, they ask you more, and then you go talk to the person who is trying to buy the...
You make it part of your pushback.
You're like, you know what, this is just this increases the cost of the service we're delivering. So if we don't standardize on these things, we'll need to charge more.
Yeah.
One thing we didn't talk about, we're talking about questionnaires and just dealing with this. One thing I will absolutely and do advise on is getting in front of your contracts as well to make sure you're not promising something that you can't deliver on.
That's a whole good conversation.
Yeah.
But that's 100%. Part of that's almost the first battle, that you're not promising a SOC 2 or an ISO or something like that. And then they sign the contract, and you're like, what do I have to deliver on? Well, that's very simple.
Whenever we're doing a SOC 2 readiness evaluation, we're trying to figure out what trust principles to pick so that you can demonstrate it. A lot of this, and one of my CPA friends had mentioned this. So Matt said to me, well, what in the contract with your customer are you telling them you're going to do?
Right.
If you're doing SLAs, then you might want to have availability in there. If if you're saying the data that you give them after you process it is going to be this accurate, processing integrity. So you might want those extra trust principles. So that's just another thought process.
Yeah, absolutely.
Instead, the only required is security.
Right. Yeah. And that's just a good place to start and add on later, but maybe you want to do more.
The contracts thing can be a nightmare, though, because although the questionnaires, although they feel like a nightmare because they're constantly coming in, the contracts, typically any organization at scale has this massive backlog of them. And so if you're coming into this from the perspective of an organization that has not really inspected those in the past, there can be quite a backlog to go through to get comfortable that you're not already signed up for a whole bunch of stuff that you may not be doing.
Do you actually go through the backlog?
You take a risk-based approach.
Yeah.
You figure out like, okay, which of these vendors are we using very heavily, or which ones of these things could be very scary for various reasons? Let's start there.
Like you're doing that currently with a vendor in your current capacity.
If you have the data, you also say, okay, which of these contracts are just naturally going to be renewed in a year? Okay, I'll wait until their renewal date to do the review, but let's just make sure we flag them so that we go through them as they come due. Yeah. Like, it's all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I don't typically, unless it's relevant, to pull the contracts on previous engagements. Again, contracts are when things go wrong, not when things are right, typically, type of thing.
Yeah, but there is a risk there.
But I'll try to inject myself into the process to make sure forward, data that things aren't getting worse.
But there is like the risk-based approach there sometimes is, well, you're right, if things go wrong, and if the thing goes wrong, but you have confirmed or you've certified to another party that it won't go wrong for these reasons that were not occurring, well, now you're liable for a whole bunch of things that you probably don't want to be liable for, even though you didn't know. So it's like this pocket of secret risks that you need to start to uncover potentially.
Yeah. So make sure that the questionnaires you're getting when you're answering them are lined up with expectations in the contract you have. That's a great takeaway.
Yeah, actually, I really like that because, if you're redlining the contracts, and I don't know that I've seen a program to date that has sort of a clear linkage between those two things. Probably should be.
Yeah. Well, now I'll have to look for it.
I like that. Yeah.
That's good. Awesome.
All right.
Is that a wrap?
Good episode.
It's a wrap. Yeah. So thank you, everyone, for joining us for episode 6. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe up to it, and share. Tell all your friends with this, and we'll see you next month. Cheers, everyone.
Cheers.
Bye.